Good day everyone. I am Gemaline C. Pascolado and today I will be discussing about the rural development challenges in the Philippines. Understanding rural development challenges in the Philippines is very crucial. Rural development is not just about improving life in the provinces. It is essential for the country's overall progress, prosperity, and stability. In this session, I will talk about the first three key challenges in rural development, which are the following. Number one, infrastructure deficiencies. Second, land ownership and reform. And third is climate vulnerability. Now let's go to the infrastructure. When we say infrastructure deficiencies, it refers to the lack or poor quality or inadequate maintenance of basic physical facilities and systems that are essential for economic activities, social services, and daily life. And one of these is the basic services gaps. So many rural areas lack reliable goods, electricity, clean water, and sanitation. And globally, about 1 billion people live all over 2 kilometers from an all-weather road. 685 million have no electricity, and 2.6 billion lack safe drinking water. This makes it hard to transport goods, access markets, and deliver basic services like healthcare and education. So, basic services gaps refer to the lack or insufficiency of essential public services that people need for daily life, health, education, and livelihood. In rural Philippines, these gaps are particularly wide compared to urban areas, and they directly hinder development. Addressing these basic gaps is essential to ensure that rural Filipinos can live healthy, productive lives and contribute fully to the progress of our country. Next, we have digital divide. So limited internet connectivity restricts access to information, online markets, and digital services, widening the gap between the rural and urban areas. So digital divide that refers to the gap between the groups of or areas that have access to modern information and communication technology or ICT, like the internet, computers, and smartphones, and those that do not have or have limited or poor quality access. In the Philippines, this gap is most obvious between urban and rural areas, and also between rich and poor households. The digital divide is not just about the lack of internet. It is also a barrier to education, income, and equality opportunity. So bridging it is essential to make the rural development an inclusive and sustainable. Another infrastructure deficiency is the third is high cost and low returns. So building and maintaining infrastructure in remote, sparsely populated areas is expensive, and returns on investment are often slower, which discouraging public and private funding. So when we say high cost and low return, refers to a situation where the expenses, effort, and resources needed to develop rural areas are very high, but the benefits, the income, or the progress achieved are low or slow to come. So this is one of the biggest reasons why rural development in the Philippines remains difficult. High cost and low return creates a vicious cycle. It is expensive to develop rural areas, but because they are poor, they cannot generate enough income to pay for their own development. So breaking this cycle requires a smart planning, long-term investment, and finding ways to make rural activities more profitable and efficient. The second key challenges in rural development is land ownership and reform. So under land ownership and reform is number one, unequal distribution. So land is often concentrated in the hands of a few, while smallholder farmers and rural communities have limited access. For example, over 80% of farmland in sub-Saharan Africa is owned by a group of people only. So when we say unequal distribution, it means that the land is not shared fairly. A small number of people own or control most of the land. So while the majority who work on it have a very little or none at all, in the Philippines, this is one of the oldest and most serious problems in rural areas. Unequal distribution of land is not just about property. It is about justice, dignity, and opportunity. When land is shared more fairly, farmers have more control over their lives, work harder, and help develop the countryside. So, second, under land ownership and reform, is insecure tenure. So, many people lack former land titles or clear property right, so making them vulnerable to displacement and discouraging long-term investment in agriculture or land improvement. So when we say insecure tenure, it means that people who use or occupy the land do not have clear legal and protected rights to keep it. So they live with the fear of being evicted, displaced, or losing their land without proper reason or compensation. In the Philippines, this is a major barrier to rural development. Secure tenure is the foundation of development. When farmers know their land is safe and theirs, they work harder, invest more, and help build a stronger, more prosperous countryside. Next is legal and cultural barriers. Conflicts between statutory laws and customary practices, as well as gender inequalities, often prevent marginalized groups, especially women, from owning or inheriting land. So when we say legal and cultural barriers, so these are obstacles created by laws, rules, and traditional beliefs that the make it difficult to achieve the fair land ownership and effective land reform. In the Philippines, these barriers often work together to keep the system unfair and slow down the progress. Solving the land problems requires not just changing laws, but also changing the mindset and respecting different ways of life. So breaking these legal cultural barriers is essential in order to create a more just and productive rural society. Now let's go to the implementation challenges. Even when land reform laws exist, weak institution, corruption, and political resistance make them difficult to enforce effectively. So when we say implementation challenge, it refers to the difficulties and problems encountered when putting land reform laws and policies into actual practice. Even with good laws on paper, many obstacles prevent them from being fully and effectively carried out in the Philippines. Implementation is the weak link in the land reform. Good laws are not enough. They need a strong leadership, efficient system, and genuine commitment to make them work for the people who need them the most. Land ownership and reform are all about justice and opportunities. When farmers own the land they work, they have more dignity, more incentive to produce, and more chance to escape poverty. So solving this problem is very essential for true rural development. Now let's go to the third key challenges, which is the climate vulnerability. So when we say climate vulnerability, it means that the rural communities and their livelihoods are easily harmed or affected by changes in weather patterns and extreme natural events. In the Philippines, this is one of the biggest threats to rural development because the country is often hit by disasters and rural people depend heavily on nature for their living. Under climate vulnerability is the increased risk. So rural communities, especially those dependent on agriculture, are highly exposed to extreme weather events like droughts, floods, and storms, which destroy their crops, livestock, and property. So increased risk refer to the growing livelihood and severity of a negative impact caused by climate change, which make the rural life and development much more difficult and uncertain. In the Philippines, these risks are getting worse every year. Increased risk mean that life in the countryside is becoming more dangerous, expensive, and uncertain. Reducing these risks is not just about protecting nature, it is about protecting people's lives, livelihood, and future. Next, under climate vulnerability is the limited adaptation capacity. So many lack the resources, technology, and knowledge to adopt climate resilient practices such as drought resistant crops, improve water management, or agroecology. So this limited adaptation capacity means that rural communities do not have enough resources or recover from the negative effects of climate change. Even if they know that dangers are coming, they often cannot do much to stop or reduce the damage. Limited adaptation capacity is like being in a storm without an umbrella or shelter. You are exposed, unprotected, and helpless. So, building this capacity is essential so that communities can stand on their own and survive even when climate conditions get worse. Next is the land and ecosystem degradation. So deforestation, soil erosion, and water scarcity worsen climate impacts, further reducing productivity and livelihood opportunities. So land ecosystem degradation, it means that the quality of forest, water, and natural environment is getting worse over time. The land becomes less fertile or forests disappear and rivers or seas become damaged, making it harder to grow crops, catch fish, harder to support life. In the Philippines, this is a serious problem that makes rural development and climate adaptation even more difficult. Land and ecosystem degradation is like slowly destroying the engine that runs rural life. You cannot have development in if the very ground you stand on and the nature around you are dying. Restoring and protecting these resources is essential for long-term survival and progress. Lastly, we have interconnected challenges. Climate change also interacts with other issues. For example, land insecurity makes it harder to implement climate adaptation measures, while poor infrastructure limits access to emergency support during disaster. So, interconnected challenges, all the challenges you've learned about are not just separate problems, they are deeply connected, feeding into each other and creating a vicious cycle that is very hard to break. Solving one without addressing the other often leads to little or no progress. So, why this matters? Because the challenges are interconnected, peace, meal solution do not work. You cannot fix poverty without fixing land rights. You cannot fix agriculture without addressing climate change. And you cannot develop rural areas without building infrastructure and closing the digital divide. So real progress only happens when we tackle these problems together in a holistic and coordinated way. So that ends my report about the rural development challenges and in the Philippines. So once again, this is Jimalin C. Pasculado. Thank you for listening and God bless.